Cops pulled over a woman for no reason, but froze when her husband showed up with a badge. A single moment can flip a person's world upside down, and for Melissa Parker, that moment arrived beneath the glare of flashing blue and red lights on a quiet stretch of road outside Chicago. She wasn't speeding. There was no broken tail light and no missed stop sign, yet the cops had pulled her over anyway. In the eerie hush of that late evening, she sensed something wasn't right. Darkness, tension, and faint echoes of the city enveloped her. Little did she know, the arrival of her husband, a man with a badge of his own, would expose more than crooked intentions. A tidal wave of secrets, betrayals, and ultimate karma was about to crash down on everyone involved. Melissa Parker breathed a sigh of relief as she steered her midnight blue sedan onto a lone stretch of road heading south from downtown Chicago. She had just finished a long day at work, followed by a quick dinner with her best friend at a bistro on the Magnificent Mile, a real restaurant called the Purple Pig, famous for its Mediterranean-inspired small plates. Normally, she loved the lively atmosphere downtown, but tonight she felt exhausted, craving the comfort of home. The city lights receded behind her as she merged onto Lakeshore Drive, then transitioned to a smaller, quieter route that curved toward Parkwood, a peaceful suburb where she and her husband, James Parker, had settled after their wedding. He was usually the one returning home at odd hours due to his unpredictable shifts at the Chicago Police Department, but tonight Melissa had run late herself. The world felt still. No honking horns, no frantic rush of traffic, just the hush of the wind caressing the sides of her car. A half-moon hung low in the sky, illuminating the outskirts of Chicago in a silvery glow. She turned onto a dimly lit road known as the Tri-State Tollway I-294 extension near her neighborhood, thinking only of slipping into pajamas and maybe watching a late-night show before James got home. But a sudden glance in the rearview mirror made her pulse jump. A set of headlights loomed closer. At first, she shrugged it off. Late-night drivers sometimes sped up just to pass slower cars. Yet this vehicle matched her pace, tailing her. The presence of those two orbs of light made her uneasy. Her stomach twisted in knots as she wondered if she should speed up, slow down, or change lanes. Then came the blast of red and blue. Flashing lights erupted behind her. Her heart pounded. She immediately eased her car onto the shoulder. When she cut the engine, a swirl of ominous questions invaded her mind. Did I forget to switch on my blinker? Is there something wrong with my plates or lights? Why do I feel so uncomfortable? Already on edge, Melissa double-checked her seatbelt and rummaged nervously for her driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. She could feel the tension coil through her body, a sensation she couldn't shake. She had done nothing wrong. Why had they pulled her over? With the window lowered, Melissa watched two silhouettes approach, illuminated by the patrol car's headlights. The closer they got, the more she sensed something was off. Their steps seemed slow, methodical, unusually so. She'd been through a routine traffic stop before, but this felt different. The first officer, a tall man with a shaved head, leaned down. "License and registration," he barked, not offering a greeting or explanation. Melissa nodded, meeting his gaze. "Yes, officer." She passed him her documents, her voice calm despite the tremor she felt in her chest. As a police detective's wife, she understood the importance of maintaining composure, but she also trusted she had every right to ask questions. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" The tall officer's face remained impassive. "We'll get to that," he said curtly. Glancing at the information, he stepped back. His partner, a shorter man with a prominent moustache, hovered near the trunk of her car, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. The posture screamed intimidation. Seconds stretched into a full minute before the tall officer reappeared, shining a flashlight into her vehicle. "Ma'am, "Step out of the car," he ordered, backing up to allow her room. Melissa's heart hammered. It was unusual for an officer to demand she exit without giving a reason. Adrenaline rushed through her, but she remained outwardly calm. She knew she had to comply or risk escalation. "Sure, officer," she said, carefully unfastening her seatbelt. As she stepped onto the gravel shoulder, the cold air stung her cheeks. She raised her hand slightly to show she wasn't carrying anything. "Could you tell me what I did wrong?" He gave a dismissive snort. "Suspicion of reckless driving," he said, glancing briefly toward the second officer, who nodded, as if to confirm a rehearsed story. Melissa's thoughts spiraled. Reckless driving. She had been under the speed limit, no abrupt lane changes, no swerving. It made no sense. Yet she swallowed her protest for now, keenly aware of how quickly these situations could escalate, especially at night on a lonely road. As the tall officer motioned for Melissa to walk toward the patrol car, she noticed that instead of the typical black and white Ford Explorer often used by the Chicago Police Department, this was a Ford Crown Victoria, an older model. The crest on the side read Parkwood Police Department, which, while legitimate for the suburban force, struck her as odd. She had rarely seen them out this far from town limits. The second officer circled her car, shining his flashlight through the windows, presumably searching for contraband. But the flashlight lingered too long on the passenger seat, as though hoping to catch a glimpse of something incriminating. When the tall officer reached for his handcuffs, Melissa's pulse accelerated. "Officer, is there a reason you're about to cuff me?" she asked, voice firm yet controlled. He shrugged. "We have reason to believe you might be carrying illegal substances." He then rattled off some procedure about ensuring safety, but his tone lacked conviction, like he was searching for a plausible excuse. This felt so wrong. Melissa took a slow, steady breath, remembering James's instructions for dealing with such moments. Stay calm, be polite, gather as many details as possible. She glanced at the name tag pinned to the officer's uniform, G.S. Sullivan. "All right, Officer Sullivan," she said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm not carrying anything illegal. You can check my bag if you'd like." She gestured to the small purse she'd left on the passenger seat. For a fleeting moment, a look passed between Sullivan and his partner, a silent conversation that felt orchestrated. Then Sullivan muttered, "Cuff her," to the second officer, who swiftly grabbed Melissa's wrists, snapping metal around them. "Officer," she exclaimed, panic threatening to tear away her composure. "I'm cooperating. I haven't resisted. Is this really necessary?" The cuffs were tight, biting into her skin. Sullivan leaned in, lowering his voice. "You people think you can do whatever you want," he sneered, though what he meant by "you" people was unclear. Maybe an insult aimed at city folks. Maybe something else. "We have reason to suspect you of a crime. Let's see if your story holds." This is insane, Melissa thought, her heart pounding. What crime? She wanted to shout, but she kept her voice measured. "I'd like to call my husband," she said, meeting Sullivan's stare. "He's with the Chicago Police Department." Something flickered in Sullivan's eyes, fear, or maybe anger, but he recovered quickly. "You'll get your phone call when we take you in. Right now, you keep quiet." The second officer, name tag reading Martinez, pulled Melissa toward the squad car. He opened the rear door and nudged her inside, the seat's cold vinyl pinching through the thin fabric of her coat. The interior smelled like stale coffee and pungent disinfectant. Outside, Sullivan rummaged through her sedan, tossing aside papers from the glove compartment. Melissa craned her neck, trying to see if he planted anything. But from her vantage, the glare made it impossible to be certain. Anxiety gnawed at her. What if they're crooked cops out for a quick score? Could they be part of some bigger scheme? Her thoughts drifted to James. They had met at a fundraiser for local youth initiatives in Chicago. She was volunteering, and he was there representing the Chicago PD. There was an instant spark, his moral compass aligned so strongly with hers. He was the kind of cop who believed in community policing and fairness. Melissa had always been proud to stand by his side. She also knew that James had come across unscrupulous officers during his time on the force. He'd told her stories of internal politics, hidden alliances, and that unfortunate reality: not everyone who wore the badge upheld its integrity. Right now, it seemed she had stumbled upon two such examples. A rap on the window startled Melissa from her thoughts. Martinez peered in. "If you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. She stared back, an icy dread clashing with her anger. "I have nothing to hide," she said softly, more to herself than to him. Sullivan returned to the squad car, sliding into the driver's seat. "We're taking her in," he told Martinez. "She's got a suspicious bag in her trunk." Melissa's eyes widened. Suspicious bag? She hadn't traveled with anything but a suitcase full of clothes last week, nothing that could be misconstrued as illegal. She was sure it was still at home. What were they talking about? Straining against the cuffs, Melissa bit her lip and spoke up. "Could you at least let me call my husband? I have the right to make a call." Martinez twisted in his seat to glare at her. "Shut it," he snapped. But Sullivan didn't respond. He fiddled with the computer system, typing in her information. Melissa Parker. Married to James Parker. Chicago PD. Sullivan read from the screen. "Oh well, look at that. She's not lying." Martinez glanced at the monitor, then shot Melissa a cautious look. "Doesn't matter. We do our job anyway." But something in Martinez's eyes revealed uncertainty. A quiet tension built between the two officers, as though they had expected her to be some random motorist, not connected to a higher authority within the city. Even so, they seemed determined to proceed with their questionable search. From the back seat, Melissa took a calculated risk. She had her Apple Watch strapped to her wrist. Although the cuff around that wrist was tight, she managed to twist her forearm just enough to activate the voice command. Quietly she whispered, "Hey Siri, call James Parker." In the hum of the idling engine, she couldn't be sure if the watch picked up her command. Yet, after a tense moment, she heard a faint ringing in her ear, so muted she almost thought she imagined it. Sullivan shifted the car into drive, and the vehicle pulled away from the shoulder. The Crown Victoria's tires crunched the gravel, then hit the asphalt with a low roar. Melissa prayed James would pick up. On the third ring, his familiar voice came through soft, staticky. "But there." "Mel, you okay?" James asked. She cleared her throat, trying to suppress the trembling in her voice. "Honey, I've been pulled over by Parkwood PD. They're taking me to the station. They claim I was driving recklessly and had a suspicious bag." She shot a glance at the front seats to be sure neither officer realized she was on a call. "Parkwood PD?" James's tone sharpened. "Where exactly?" Melissa quickly recited the approximate location. "We're on the road heading—" She paused as Martinez's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. She coughed, pretending to stifle a sneeze. "We're near I-294, close to the exit for the old industrial park." "Hang on, Mel," James said, his voice urgent. "I'm on my way." The line went dead. Melissa inhaled shakily, grateful that her husband knew enough to track her phone or her watch if needed. She only hoped he could get there in time. The ride to the Parkwood station was tense and silent, broken only by the crackle of the radio dispatcher, who occasionally rattled off minor incidents in the area. Sullivan and Martinez didn't speak to Melissa, and she chose not to provoke them. A flurry of questions swarmed her mind. Why them? Why me? Why now? She recalled a local news report about a string of questionable arrests and potential corruption within smaller suburban police departments. Though the focus had been on another area outside Chicago, Could Sullivan and Martinez be involved in something similar? Soon they arrived at a squat, cement block building labeled Parkwood Police Department. Dim overhead lamps flickered in the otherwise empty parking lot. It was eerily silent for a police station, no other squad cars, no hustle of officers finishing paperwork or suspects being brought in. Sullivan parked near the back entrance. Martinez hauled Melissa out of the back seat, ignoring her hiss of discomfort when the cuffs bit into her wrists. They led her through a side door, past a hallway with fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. The corridor was deserted. An unsettling hush clung to every wall. At a small processing room, Martinez roughly sat Melissa on a hard plastic chair. Sullivan slid behind a desk, rummaging for the paperwork. "Name," he demanded, as though he hadn't just read all her information minutes ago. She repeated her full name and address. "I want my phone call," she said firmly. "As an arrestee, I have the right to." Sullivan slammed a fist on the table. "You'll get it when we say so. Now shut your mouth." Melissa fought the instinct to flinch. Something about Sullivan's eyes radiated menace. Martinez hovered behind her, arms crossed, jaw set. She was outnumbered and cornered. Her heart hammered, but she channeled James's composed demeanor. "Never let them see you panic." When the door burst open behind them, everyone froze. Melissa's heart soared with relief, expecting it to be James. But instead, a middle-aged man in a crisp white shirt with captain's bars on his collar stormed in, glowering at Sullivan and Martinez. "What's going on here?" the captain demanded, voice echoing in the confined space. "I got an alert from the main desk that you brought someone in for reckless driving." "Where's the paperwork?" Sullivan hesitated, quickly forging an excuse. "Captain Nichols, she was suspicious. We found a black duffel bag in her trunk. She claimed she was driving home from the city, but her eyes were bloodshot, might have been using." Nichols fixed him with a steely glare. "Where's the bag?" Sullivan stumbled over his words. We left it in the cruiser. I'll grab it." In that brief, awkward silence, the shrill ring of a phone cut through the tension. Nichols's personal phone. He answered brusquely. "Nichols here." A brief pause, and then his gaze settled on Melissa. "Yes, she's here." Another pause. "Understood." He lowered the phone, exhaling a tight sigh. That was the Chicago PD. Detective James Parker is on his way. At the mention of James's name, Sullivan's face paled. He and Martinez exchanged a worried glance. Captain Nichols, sensing the tension, arched a brow at them. "What exactly have you two done?" James Parker tore through the quiet streets of Parkwood in his black SUV, a personal vehicle but outfitted with a dash light that identified him as law enforcement if needed. His heart thundered like a war drum. The phone call from Melissa had rattled him, but the message from Captain Nichols at Parkwood PD confirmed his worst fear. Something was seriously wrong. As he turned onto a side street leading to the station, memories welled up of a time he'd crossed paths with Officer Sullivan, a detail that made his blood run cold. Years ago, James had been a rookie detective investigating police misconduct in a neighboring precinct. Sullivan's name had cropped up in a series of questionable stops and allegations of planted evidence, but no solid proof had emerged back then. The internal affairs team couldn't make charges stick, and Sullivan had been reassigned to a smaller department outside the city Parkwood. "Now he has my wife in custody," James thought, fists gripping the steering wheel. He screeched to a halt in front of the squat building. The sight of Melissa's blue sedan with its trunk open, items scattered inside, spurred him into action. He slammed his car door and headed for the entrance, ignoring the tight knot in his stomach. Inside, Captain Nichols was chewing out Sullivan and Martinez, demanding an explanation. Melissa sat stiffly in a plastic chair, cuffs still on her wrists. The moment James stepped in, he locked eyes with her, relief flooding his expression. In 2 strides, he was at her side. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, though tears rimmed her eyes. He faced Nichols, a man James had met briefly at a regional law enforcement conference. "Captain, with all due respect, why is my wife being held here?" Nichols gave a heavy sigh. "Detective Parker, I was just about to find out the same. Your wife was brought in for alleged reckless driving and possession, but there's no official record of any contraband being booked into evidence, and from the preliminary check, there's not even a formal reason for her arrest logged into our system." James's jaw clenched as he stared Sullivan down. "Remove the cuffs," he said, voice low with controlled anger. Sullivan hesitated. Martinez shifted uneasily. Finally, Sullivan fished out a key and unlocked Melissa's restraints. She rubbed her wrists, red marks already forming. "Where's this supposed bag of contraband?" Nichols asked, arms folded. Sullivan cleared his throat, looking to Martinez for backup. "It's still in the trunk, Captain. We were about to bring it in." James narrowed his eyes. "So you arrested her on suspicion of something you haven't even inspected properly?" Martinez scowled. "We had reason to suspect." "Cut it," Nichols snapped. "Show us the bag." Under everyone's watchful gaze, Sullivan and Martinez exchanged a tense glance. Then they led the way outside to Melissa's sedan. The trunk was popped open, indeed revealing a small black duffel bag resting near the spare tire. Sullivan unzipped it dramatically. A hush fell over the group as a few random items spilled out: an old sweater, a folded blanket, and some plastic containers from Melissa's last road trip. Hardly incriminating. Certainly not the stash of narcotics or illegal firearms that would justify a felony stop. Melissa's face was streaked with anger and relief. "That's my winter emergency bag, in case the car breaks down." Captain Nichols's eyes bore into Sullivan. "You said you had probable cause," he thundered. "What in the world made you think any of this was illegal?" Sullivan faltered, sweat beading on his brow. I must have been mistaken. The dispatch reported suspicious activity near this location, a car matching her description." James immediately pulled out his phone. "I'll verify that." Shouldn't take long. Martinez made a move, as if to reach for James's phone, but caught himself. He stood rigid, face turning pale, as James dialed the Chicago dispatch center he worked with. Within a minute, James had an answer. There was no such call about suspicious activity involving a car matching Melissa's. Nichols turned to his two officers, a dark scowl etched on his face. "Officers Sullivan and Martinez, step inside. We're going to talk in my office. Detective Parker, Miss Parker, please wait in the main lobby." Melissa clung to James's arm as they sat in the modest lobby, which looked more like an outdated dentist's waiting area than a police station. A small TV mounted on the wall played local news on mute, while old magazines cluttered the coffee table. The emptiness of the place at this late hour wrapped them in a bubble of anxiety. James whispered, "Are you sure you're all right? They didn't hurt you?" She shook her head, though tears threatened. "I'm okay, just terrified. They cuffed me, made all sorts of accusations. I felt powerless." She swallowed hard. "Is Sullivan someone you've dealt with before?" James exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. He came up in an internal affairs investigation, accused of pulling people over without cause, planting evidence in at least one instance. But no one testified against him. I never trusted him. Melissa laid her head on his shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of his aftershave. "I'm so glad you came," she whispered. I'm scared of what they might have done if you hadn't." Before James could respond, the door leading to the back offices swung open. Captain Nichols emerged, his stern face unreadable. "Detective Parker, could I speak with you in private?" James nodded, gently prying himself from Melissa. "Stay here. I'll be right back." Following Nichols into a cramped office, James found the captain's cluttered desk and dusty file cabinets lit by a flickering fluorescent overhead. The captain shut the door and faced James, arms crossed. "I've placed Sullivan and Martinez on immediate administrative leave," Nichols said. Their body cams were conveniently switched off. "This is going to be a mess for our department, but I won't stand for misconduct under my watch." James breathed a partial sigh of relief. "Thank you, Captain. That's the right call. I want to press charges if it turns out they falsified records or tried to plant evidence." Nichols ran a hand over his short salt and pepper hair. "I understand. I can't confirm all the details yet, but from what I see, it seems they were working some angle extortion, maybe. Your wife has a nice car. Perhaps they thought they could threaten her into handing over cash to avoid a fake arrest." His eyes hardened. It's not the first time a scandal like that has popped up in smaller precincts. "I'll be launching a full investigation." James nodded, relief and anger churning within him. "I appreciate your transparency. My wife and I will cooperate in whatever way we can. But I hope you understand I'm also going to bring this to the attention of the Cook County State's Attorney." Nichols waved a hand in resignation. "I understand. I've already made the initial call to them. They'll want to talk to you and Melissa directly. For now, take your wife home." The drive back to their suburban house was quiet, the tension between them a reminder of the ordeal they'd just escaped. Melissa stared out the passenger window, streetlights casting fleeting shadows across her face. James let out a slow exhale. "Mel, I'm so sorry you had to go through that." "If I'd known Sullivan was out here," she gave a weak smile. "It's not your fault. You came as soon as you heard. That's all that matters." She placed her hand on his. "You saved me from who knows what." Fatigue weighed on them as they pulled into their driveway. The modest, two-story home felt like a sanctuary at that moment. Once inside, Melissa sank onto the living room couch, dropping her head in her hands. James disappeared into the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She sipped, letting the warmth spread through her. "Thank you," she whispered. Then the tears came, unbidden. She wasn't used to feeling helpless, but this night had pushed her past her limits. James wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Let it out," he murmured. "You're safe here." Eventually, her tears subsided. A fierce resolve replaced them. "I want them held accountable," she said, voice trembling with leftover emotion. "Those men are supposed to protect and serve, and instead they're terrorizing innocent people." James nodded. "And we'll make sure they are. I'll talk to the state's attorney, and I'm sure Nichols is going to file an internal affairs report. Trust me, those two won't walk away from this unscathed." Morning light brought a semblance of normalcy, but the undercurrent of tension remained. While James prepared for a meeting at CPD headquarters to address the incident, Melissa decided to visit her friend, Grace Porter, an investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune. If there was a bigger story behind Sullivan and Martinez, Grace would be the one to dig it up. They met at a coffee shop near Millennium Park called Intelligentsia Coffee, a real Chicago staple. Sitting at a small table by the window, Melissa recounted the events of the previous night. Grace's eyes widened, her pen racing across her notepad. "This is big," Grace said, leaning forward. "There have been whisperings about something going on in suburban departments, racial profiling, unjustified stops, even rumored bribery rings. But it's all been hush-hush. People are afraid to go on record." She tapped her pen against the table. "You're willing to speak publicly about this?" Melissa hesitated, recalling the terror in that dark patrol car. Then she nodded, a surge of courage solidifying her decision. "Yes, if it helps stop this from happening to anyone else." Grace gave her a confident grin. "Then let's do it. I'll start investigating Sullivan's and Martinez's records, see if I can find a pattern. And I'll speak with the Cook County State's Attorney's office to confirm any official investigations. But, she paused, looking sympathetically at Melissa, this could get intense. You might face backlash. I understand, Melissa said quietly, but I'm not backing down. Hours later, while Melissa was back home, tidying up the kitchen, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her heart jumped at the thought of Sullivan or Martinez showing up unannounced. But reminding herself they were on administrative leave, she approached the door carefully. She peered through the peephole and was surprised to see Captain Nichols standing on her front porch. She opened the door hesitantly. "Captain," he removed his cap politely. "Miss S. Parker, I hope I'm not intruding. May I come in? There's something I need to discuss with you and James, if he's home." She stepped aside, waving him in. "James is at the station. Is everything all right?" Nichols took a seat in the living room, the posture of a man with a heavy burden. "Not exactly," he said. "After our talk last night, I dug deeper into Sullivan's and Martinez's files. It appears there may be more to this. Several traffic stops with questionable outcomes, body cams conveniently failing, statements never filed properly, you name it. I suspect they've been running a scheme pulling over unsuspecting drivers, then demanding payouts to drop fake charges." Melissa's stomach twisted in disgust. "That's awful," she whispered. The captain nodded grimly. "It gets worse. I tried to speak with them this morning about handing over all equipment and official notebooks for an internal audit. They both refused. Instead, they handed in a short statement about you resisting arrest. Obviously, it's nonsense. But I wanted you to be aware they might try to spin the story." Melissa clenched her fists. "What can we do? I've forwarded all the evidence we have to the county prosecutor," Nichols explained. "But these things can drag out. If you're approached by them or anyone else from the department about dropping the matter, let me know immediately. I'm warning you, these men could have allies. Corruption sometimes runs deeper than we suspect." His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, frowning. "I have to go, but please stay alert." Over the following week, Melissa's life turned upside down. She'd agreed to tell her story to Grace for a piece in the Chicago Tribune, which triggered an avalanche of attention. She found herself receiving calls from lawyers, supportive messages from strangers on social media, and the occasional threatening note scrawled on an unsigned letter delivered to their mailbox. James insisted on driving her to work and picking her up, refusing to let her commute alone. The tension weighed heavily on both of them, but they remained resolute. They'd had enough of police corruption staining the badge. One evening, as James was wrapping up an investigation downtown, Melissa stepped out of her office building, scanning the street for his SUV. The day had been long, her nerves frazzled by constant vigilance. A beep on her phone signaled a text, "Running late. Traffic. Be there in 10. She sighed, hugging her coat tighter against the chilly wind. That's when a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The back window rolled down, revealing Martinez, his moustache twitching with a smirk. "Need a ride?" Melissa's heart jumped. Fear tangled with a spark of anger. "No," she replied coldly, stepping back onto the sidewalk. She fumbled in her purse for pepper spray. Martinez laughed, a hollow sound. "Relax, not here to cause trouble, just a friendly chat." He leaned further out the window. "You see, it doesn't help if you go blabbing to the press. My buddy Sullivan and we got friends who don't appreciate your little crusade. Maybe you should reconsider going to trial." She locked eyes with him. "Are you threatening me?" His grin widened. "Threatening? I'm just saying some folks might reward your silence, if you catch my drift. You want this to go away quickly and quietly, or you want to drag it out?" Melissa's words trembled with courage. "I want justice." The grin vanished from his face. He muttered something under his breath, then nodded to the driver. The car sped off, merging into the bustling flow of Chicago traffic just as James arrived. Breathless, Melissa relayed what had happened. Rage flared in James's eyes. "I'm taking you straight to CPD HQ," he said, fists clenched around the steering wheel. Martinez has crossed the line. At Chicago PD headquarters, they met with Lieutenant Amanda Rodriguez from the Internal Affairs Division. She was a formidable presence, short, athletic, and known for her meticulous investigations. Sipping a cup of strong black coffee, she listened to Melissa's account of the threat. "We'll need a formal statement, complete with as much detail as you can remember," Rodriguez said, powering up her laptop. "We'll cross-reference surveillance footage from the block around your office, see if we can catch a plate or a face." Melissa glanced at James. She felt both relief and anxiety. "I just don't want to look over my shoulder every time I go outside." Rodriguez gave her a sympathetic nod. "I understand. Believe me, we deal with this often, officers thinking they're above the law. The best approach is to build a solid case. We have both local and federal resources if necessary. Once we have Martinez and Sullivan cornered, they'll have no choice but to face charges or flip on anyone else involved." James exhaled slowly. "What about protection for Melissa?" "We'll arrange some patrols by your home and her workplace," Rodriguez assured them. "We can't spare a full-time detail unless there's an immediate threat, but we'll keep an eye on the situation." While James and Rodriguez discussed logistics, Melissa sank into an office chair, mind spinning. How did a simple drive home turn into such a tangled nightmare? She refused to let fear paralyze her, but the dread was real. Back home, Grace Porter's article dropped in the Chicago Tribune. Parkwood PD, under fire, corruption allegations, stir suburban police scandal. The piece detailed Melissa's ordeal, referenced other questionable stops, and cited Captain Nichols's commitment to a full internal review. The article quickly gained traction on social media, and even garnered coverage from local news channels. That same evening, they watched the 6 o'clock news. Seeing a brief segment, a reporter stood outside the Parkwood station, summarizing the allegations. The story was out, and public opinion began to boil. James fielded calls from colleagues within the CPD, offering support or fishing for details. Melissa's family reached out from out of state, worried for her safety. The air felt electric, with tension like a storm about to break. Then a shocking development rocked them. Captain Nichols was placed on leave. According to a brief statement from the Parkwood mayor's office, serious questions have been raised about the captain's oversight. The new interim police chief, someone named Bauer, declined to comment further. When Grace relayed the news over the phone, her voice trembled with frustration. "This is classic pushback," she said. "They're trying to sabotage the man who's trying to clean up their mess." Melissa felt a renewed sense of fear. If Nichols was out, who would hold Sullivan and Martinez accountable inside Parkwood PD? "We can't let them sweep this under the rug." The next day, James arranged a meeting with Captain Nichols, who was now effectively an outsider in his own department. They met at a small diner near Midway Airport, in a corner booth away from prying ears. Nichols looked tired, lines of stress creasing his forehead. "I was removed because I tried to do the right thing," he said, voice low. "I suspect the mayor or someone close to him is protecting Sullivan and Martinez, or at least trying to stifle the scandal until they can figure out damage control." James nodded grimly. "We want to push forward with charges. The state's attorney is looking into it, but without your cooperation from inside." Nichols held up a hand. "I'm still cooperating, just off the record. I have documents and internal memos backing up everything. If you provide this to the right channels, it might force Parkwood's hand." He produced a flash drive from his pocket, sliding it across the table to James. "This is everything I've got. Use it wisely." Melissa, who'd accompanied James, looked at Nichols with gratitude. "Thank you, Captain. We'll make sure it doesn't go to waste." Nichols managed a tight smile. "Be careful. Sullivan and Martinez won't go down without a fight. You might find out they're connected to something bigger than I initially suspected. Armed with Nichols's documents, James went to the state's attorney's office the following morning. Melissa joined him, determined to see this through. The building's marble floors and tall columns radiated a sober authority. They passed through security, escorted by an aide into a large conference room where Assistant State's Attorney Lauren Kim waited. Kim was a sharp woman in her late 30s, her eyes reflecting a relentless drive. James handed over the flash drive. Captain Nichols compiled these. We believe it corroborates a pattern of misconduct and possibly a larger corruption scheme within Parkwood PD. Kim plugged the drive into her laptop. After skimming a few files, she gave a low whistle. Internal memos referencing quota stops for certain income brackets, disciplinary warnings that vanished. This is serious. If any of these documents are legitimate, we have a strong case. Melissa felt a flicker of hope. So, you can charge them soon? Kim looked up, expression grave. We'll prepare charges against Sullivan and Martinez, yes. But if there's a bigger network, we need to ensure we have enough evidence to bring down everyone involved. Otherwise, they'll just replace a couple of scapegoats and keep operating. I'll be in touch with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. They might want in on this. James and Melissa exchanged glances. The scale of this had grown exponentially. FBI involvement? It was daunting, but if it meant real justice, so be it. With the legal gears in motion, Melissa tried to resume a semblance of normal life. But fear still lurked in every shadow. James accompanied her everywhere, their phone lines constantly lit up with friends, reporters, or fellow officers checking in. Late one night, a loud bang rattled them from sleep. Melissa shot up in bed, heart pounding, while James leaped to his feet, gun in hand. Cautiously they crept downstairs, adrenaline thrumming. Their living room window was shattered, shards of glass glinting on the floor. A dark object, a brick, it seemed, lay on the carpet amid the broken glass. And taped to it was a note, "Drop it, or else." Melissa's knees shook. James dialed 911, voice tight with anger. "We need patrol cars here, now." As they waited for officers to respond, James paced the living room, tension rolling off him in waves. "They're escalating," he muttered. "Damn it, this is exactly why we need to keep pushing." Melissa's voice trembled as she spoke. "They're trying to scare us into silence." He wrapped an arm around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We won't cave. We'll get them for this." Within minutes, 2 Chicago PD units arrived, lights flashing. The officers took statements, photographed the scene, and promised to submit the evidence to the forensics lab. Melissa's hands still trembled as she held the note, sealed now in an evidence bag. James's captain from the Chicago PD also arrived, offering to put them up in a safe house until the threat subsided. However, they declined, not wanting to uproot their lives further. Instead, the house was outfitted with a temporary security system, courtesy of the department's resources. Over the next few days, the presence of marked police cruisers near their home offered a hint of safety. Yet each ring of the doorbell made Melissa's pulse spike. James seethed with frustration, wishing he could single-handedly take down Sullivan and Martinez. But that takedown was about to come from a different angle entirely. One crisp morning, as Melissa sipped her coffee in the kitchen, she got a call from Grace. The reporter's voice buzzed with excitement. "Big news! The FBI just arrested half a dozen officers in Parkwood on corruption charges, including Sullivan and Martinez. They found evidence of bribery, falsified reports, and intimidation tactics." Melissa's coffee nearly slipped from her grasp. "They got them?" "Yes," Grace exclaimed. "It's all over the news. They were handcuffed and led out of the station at dawn. Looks like that flash drive, and your statements played a big role in building the case." Relief washed over Melissa in a dizzying wave. "That's amazing," she breathed. "Thank you for letting me know." James, overhearing, rushed into the kitchen. "They caught them?" he asked, eyes bright with anticipation. Melissa repeated the news, heart swelling with vindication. "Sullivan and Martinez are under arrest, along with others involved." In the days that followed, the media feasted on the story of corruption within the Parkwood Police Department. News anchors replayed footage of the arrests, showing Martinez's mustached face twisted with anger as he was escorted away, and Sullivan's cold glare directed at the cameras. The higher-ups connected to them were also brought in for questioning, and Captain Nichols's suspension was lifted. In a televised statement, Nichols expressed hope that his department could rebuild trust. Weeks later, Melissa and James stood outside the Cook County Courthouse, the historic building's grand pillars framing the entrance. Today was the preliminary hearing against Sullivan, Martinez, and a handful of other officers. The swirl of cameras, reporters, and anxious citizens gathered on the steps gave the scene a feverish energy. Inside, the stale scent of disinfectant and the hushed murmurs of lawyers welcomed them. Melissa could feel her stomach quiver, but James squeezed her hand, silently encouraging her. They took seats on a wooden bench near the front, hearts pounding as the defendants were led in, shackled. Sullivan's gaze flicked to Melissa, loathing etched into every line of his face. Martinez refused to look at her, staring at the floor instead. Their defense attorneys murmured among themselves, exchanging documents with the prosecution. Assistant State's Attorney Lauren Kim led the charge, presenting evidence meticulously gathered, the dashcam footage from other arrests, internal memos, altered police logs, and witness testimonies from victims coerced into paying off these crooked cops. When she referenced Melissa's case specifically, heads turned her way. The victim, Miss S. Parker, was unlawfully detained, handcuffed, and threatened with fabricated charges, Kim said, voice echoing in the courtroom. This pattern of targeting, perceived easy marks for extortion, has been consistent. While the defense tried to poke holes, claiming faulty technology, miscommunication, or that the victims misconstrued the officer's intentions, it was clear the evidence was damning. Melissa's heart soared when the judge found probable cause for all counts. The trial would proceed, and bail was set high enough to keep Sullivan and Martinez in custody for now. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed for comments. James guided Melissa away, but she paused long enough to speak clearly into a camera lens, voice strong and unwavering. "This is about accountability. No one is above the law. Not even those who wear the badge." The weeks that followed brought a sense of cautious relief. With Sullivan and Martinez in jail awaiting trial, the immediate threats subsided. Melissa could drive alone without glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. The window at home was repaired, though the memory of that shattered glass lingered. Support flowed in from unexpected corners. Neighbors who once barely waved at them now offered kind words. Community groups invited Melissa to speak about her experience, turning her traumatic ordeal into a platform for advocating police accountability. As for James, the roller coaster shook his faith in parts of the law enforcement system, but it also strengthened his resolve to be an upright officer. He received calls from colleagues who admired his stance. There were also those who remained silent, perhaps nervous about departmental politics. Still, James continued his detective work with renewed passion. One afternoon, they visited Captain Nichols, who had returned to duty in Parkwood, but under new leadership. He guided them through the newly overhauled station, showing them the changes, updated body cam policies, thorough checks and balances. "It's not perfect," he admitted, "but it's a start." Melissa smiled faintly. "Real change has to begin somewhere." At last, the trial date arrived. The evidence was overwhelming. Victims who had long been afraid to speak out took the stand, emboldened by the knowledge that they weren't alone. Each person's story echoed Melissa's, in some way illegal stops, baseless accusations, intimidation. Sullivan and Martinez glared at the witnesses, their expressions turning stonier with each damning testimony. When it came time for Melissa to testify, she recounted every detail: the unwarranted stop, the tight handcuffs, the fear. She described how Sullivan had sneered at her, how Martinez had threatened her even after she was released. Her voice shook at times, but she refused to waver. Cross-examination attempted to paint her as mistaken or overly dramatic, but she stood firm. The jury watched her intently, some with sympathetic eyes, others with steely determination to see justice served. James testified after her, detailing the frantic call he received and the subsequent confrontation at the Parkwood station. He supported every point with calm authority, leaving little room for doubt. After days of arguments, the jury deliberated. In the end, the verdict was resounding: guilty on multiple counts of misconduct, extortion, and false imprisonment. Sullivan, Martinez, and several co-conspirators sat stoically as the judge read the sentences: significant prison time, felony convictions that stripped them of any law enforcement privileges for life. Their reputations destroyed, they walked out of the courtroom in shackles, shadows of the arrogant men who once lauded their power over innocent drivers. Hard karma had found them. In the months that followed, life took on a softer hue for Melissa and James. The sense of victory wasn't just personal, it was communal. Messages poured in from grateful citizens who'd faced or feared similar intimidation. Some said they felt emboldened to challenge wrongdoing in their own towns. Captain Nichols oversaw a revamped Parkwood Police Department, focusing on community outreach and transparent policies. He hoped to rebuild public trust and reclaim the honor of the badge. Meanwhile, investigative journalist Grace Porter garnered acclaim for her diligent reporting, and rumors hinted she might be up for an award. For Melissa, the journey had been arduous, but it led her to a place of newfound strength. She continued working her regular job, yet found herself increasingly involved in civic organizations, speaking about police accountability and the importance of community vigilance. Whenever fear tried to creep back, she reminded herself how far she'd come, no longer the startled woman on a deserted road, but a force that shone a light on corruption. James, too, grew in his commitment to ethical law enforcement. He mentored younger officers, emphasizing empathy and fairness, teaching them that a badge was a symbol of responsibility, not power. One evening, as they relaxed on their front porch, sharing a quiet moment before the sun dipped behind the suburban skyline, Melissa rested her head on James's shoulder. The weight of all they'd gone through lingered, but so did the sense of victory and closure. "You know," she said softly, "if none of this had happened, who knows how many more innocent people they'd have preyed upon." James kissed the top of her head. They picked the wrong person to pull over that night. Melissa smiled, gazing at the horizon. "I guess they did." Stories like these remind us that courage can come from unexpected places, and that standing up for what's right can spark change far beyond one individual's struggle. Melissa's ordeal on that lonely road near Chicago began as a nightmare, but transformed into a powerful call for accountability and justice. It exposed the corrupt practices lurking in the shadows and ignited a movement to protect innocent citizens from abuse of power. Now it's your turn to keep this momentum alive. If this tale moved you or opened your eyes to deeper issues, consider sharing it with those around you. Spread awareness, spark conversations, and push for transparency in all forms of authority. Your voice matters, and together we can ensure that no one else has to endure the fear Melissa felt on that fateful night. Like, share and subscribe to stay connected with more stories that champion truth.